Hello, my beautiful souls. Welcome to a new show on Living Naturally with Michaela Live, where we talk about all things for living a naturally healthy life. Today, we're diving into the concept of balance, what it truly means to align the ego and soul, how the equinox serves as a powerful symbol of equilibrium, and ways we can navigate the shifts with awareness. My guest today and recurring host is Angelica del Carmen. She is the expert in mysticism, spirituality, and personal development. This conversation is about understanding balance, not choosing one over the other, and how we need to have both ego and soul to thrive. So, how do we find the sweet spot? Let's find out. All right, welcome, Angelica. I'm happy to have you here again on this episode.
Thank you again for having me.
So, we have had many conversations about ego and soul. So, this one's going to be another one of those conversations. And we're going to touch on the ego and the soul again here in a little bit. But let's start first with talking about the equinox itself as a symbol of balance. So, I chose this topic mainly because springtime is upon us, and the equinox, it has a lot of spiritual and energetic significance. The equinox holds deep spiritual and energetic symbolism, representing the moment of perfect balance between light and dark, action and rest, inner and outer worlds. And it's a powerful time for reflection, realignment, and renewal, both in nature and in ourselves. So, let's talk a little bit about how we can use this moment to reflect on our personal balance between ego and soul and how we can work with the equinox energy. So, I will start because I know you have a lot to say on this. And so I'm going to let you run with this one. But I'll start with, for those who are wondering how you can work with the equinox energy, I have four steps that I'd like to share with you guys first. And one is to reflect on where you feel out of balance in your life. Then, two, practice grounding rituals like meditation, breath work, or mindful movement. Three, set new intentions for the season ahead. And then four, which is very important, to honor both light and shadow aspects of yourself with acceptance. So, Angelica, would you like to add something to that?
You pretty much covered a whole bunch. Sorry. Okay. No, so what I was gonna say is yes, and I love all of those. And the ones that I'll add is I love, like, I want to add to what you said at the end, without judgment or
Mhm.
without actually, because what happens, you know that I of course I speak on spirituality, but I try to bring it to like a normal level. What is happening with the equinox? It's basically said there's going to be equal amount of day than night, which means harmony. How do
Mhm.
we bring harmony into our lives? What do we think we need harmony into? What areas of our life? And then not judge it. So again, with what you were saying, not judge ourselves for I'm not there yet, I'm not this, or I'm still unbalanced here, or I'm, because that's not the intention. So I want to add that part in because it's not about fixing yourself. It's not about what do I still need to do that isn't right. It's a time of transformation, and this whole equinox brings a moment of, if you want to call it a rebirth or a spring, it's transformation and growth. Where else and how can I expand or grow, or what new things can I try? Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. So, many places in spiritual traditions, they honor the equinox as a time when the earth's energy is in equilibrium, which makes it an ideal moment for grounding practices, like meditation, setting intentions, and all of that stuff. uh, do you have any practices that you personally like to follow, or that you maybe recommend to your clients to do during this time to take advantage of that equilibrium that the earth has?
Yes. Um, okay, where do I start? So I'm trying to think of like the easiest ones because sometimes, well, I want to say, even today, after we're done with the call, I have a process where we're going to go ahead and do a fire circle, and I'm going to walk them through a process of balance and re energizing and then transmit it through the fire. But everything doesn't have to be a ritual. That's why I'm thinking, what other things can we share on your show? For example, a salt bath.
Hmm.
Salt is part of the minerals. Being in a salt bath, literally in your tub, grab your table salt if that's all you have, and just take a salt bath. That grounds you, that releases in so many ways. That's one way to ground you. Holding crystals.
Hmm.
If you don't have crystals, hold a rock,
Mm.
hug a
Yeah,
tree. As weird and funny and hippie as it sounds, go hug a tree, grab a pebble from outside, anything that brings you closer to Mother Nature. Because what I find happens or has happened to many of us, we get so disconnected from nature,
yeah,
right? So walk outside barefooted.
yeah. That's actually
It's
one of my favorites. I was going to suggest that one. I like going outside and just standing barefoot. That does a lot for me. Yeah.
right. And it could be any process that it's as simple as that, as something like, okay, what can connect me to what is originally earth?
Yeah.
Not to our concrete floor, not to our tile, not to the beautiful meditation. If you want to do a meditation, not the beautiful meditation we're going to grab off our iPad or our iPhone or the podcast or the literally just it could be as simple as just sitting outside and
Mhm.
literally smelling the grass.
Yeah.
Those
Yeah.
are very effective grounding ones.
Yeah, I like that. I think a lot of people they get bogged down in what meditation means, and it's like, and it's like, yeah, you can do guided meditations and all of that, but that's not everything that meditation is. Meditation it's just in its basic form is just being aware. It's mindfulness. Whether it's sitting and being quiet and listening to the sounds around you, or if it's sitting and listening to music, if it's sitting and just focusing on your breath, if it's walking while focusing on your breath, which is my newest thing. I have been loving doing mindful walks, which is
Uh-huh.
really cool. um, so meditation doesn't have to be this big to do, and that's one of the things that I try to explain to my clients too. Is like, keep it simple. It
Yes.
doesn't have to be all of this stuff. Just keep it simple. What resonates with you?
Right.
What resonates with you? What are you feeling like, something that can really just help you feel more connected to the earth, to the world, to yourself? You just got to listen.
Right. And the funny thing is, it's for example, I recommended go sit in the grass. If you're allergic to grass, for crying out loud, don't do it. It's
True.
right. It's people sometimes, and I used to be that, and I understand where it's coming from. They told me to do this, and then this, and then this. If not, it's not gonna work. No, that's not what we're sharing.
Right.
So what we're saying is anything that connects you, and like you just said, that works for you. It doesn't have to be what we're saying or giving ideas, but practically, you know, use what you know works for you, or try something new. Because sometimes we don't know, we don't try.
Right.
So
Yeah.
right.
And I always suggest try something new. I think just trying something new is just a really good way to just kind of excite you and reconnect with yourself, because it brings up this energy of, ooh, this is something new.
Yeah.
Because I think deep down we all want to learn or do something new. Let me think about when we were children. It's like trying something new just really, really excited us. And then, some kind of way, as we become adults, we don't do nearly enough of that. We get stuck in the daily, this is what you're supposed to do. And it's the same
Right.
thing over and over again. And I think if you can try something new, it kind of brings you back to that place of wonder, and I think that can do a whole lot for a person, particularly right now during springtime, because everything is bursting with newness. There is this new energy, there's this transformational energy going on. It is the perfect time to try something new.
Yes. Yes. I love that. Yes. Yes. And it's just like the flowers, they bloom, the chicks, the peas, the, like all these things that what you just said, that energy of transformation. From the spirituality point, when we talk about all these things, people see it so esoteric and so la la land. No, just look at spring. The
Mm-hmm.
flowers are blooming, the trees are
Mm-hmm.
blooming, they're colorful, they're having fun, they're trying a new season. That's, I think, what we forget. We forget that we are nature. We
Right.
think nature is outside of us. We think nature is outside. I'm literally pointing because, as you can see, I'm next to the outside. We always think it's outside. We are nature. And that is why the equinox and doing this whole thing with intention helps us so much more, because everything, including us, can have this
Yeah.
bloom. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, let's move to the next point. And I've already kind of touched on this a little bit at the beginning, but I wanted to talk a little bit about the equinox and the symbolism that goes along with it before we get into the discussion of the ego versus the soul. As I said, we've had a lot of these discussions, but for those who might be just watching one of these, for the first time, let's go back and define what the ego and the soul is in simple, relatable terms for people. So, how would you simply define the difference between ego and soul for someone?
Okay. Simply put, we're going to use the explanation of the brain. Okay. So, ego. Ego is what we're thinking. So when they've taught us, a lot of people about the brain, they're like, the left brain people are more analytical, thinking, strategical. How do you do this? How do you do that? It's very focused on that. However, that's how I see the ego. But the ego has also taken that bad rap of, you have to ignore the ego, and the ego is the one
Yeah,
that talks to you about fears, and the ego is the one that's holding you back. No, the ego does talk about fears because its job is to keep you safe.
right.
So it reminds you, hey, do you remember what happened when you did that and you tried that and you this and this and this happened? Careful. The soul is the one that's like, no, but it's so much fun, but try it and you'll never know. And it's more positive, and it's like that right side creative personality, right? The optimistic, the happy, the artistic, the let's try something new. Life is love. Sounds like a hippie, but that's the explanation for me. Simple way of ego and soul. Ego is what we use in our human world as our
Yeah,
mind, as our
yeah.
strategical thinking, as our mind, who we think we are. I think my name is Angelica. I forget I am a soul who's using the name Angelica. And then my soul is like, let's have curly hair and let's have fun. And the soul is someone that came for the experience in the human life. So the ego, does that make sense? Because I'm explaining it
Yeah,
kind of in
yeah,
a different
yeah.
way.
And what I'm hearing, and everybody might hear something different. I tend to be more of the analytical type, which everyone who's watched any of these shows know that. Um, but what I'm hearing is ego is more of what we think, and soul is more of what we feel.
Yes. I think
So
that's a shorter way of saying
yeah,
it.
yeah. I mean, there's more to it than that. But
Right.
you know, since we've already had this discussion before, I didn't want to go too deep into it. If
Right.
you're just watching for the first time and you want to explore more about the ego and the soul, we have done several of these. Go look at the playlist and find those and see what resonates with you so you can learn more about the ego and the soul, because we're just going to move on now. I just wanted to kind of touch on what the ego and the soul is so we can talk about balance, because that's what the
Right.
equinox is about. Okay. And so this is where we're going to talk a little bit about balancing between the ego and the soul. So, as Angelica said, we have been taught where we should not listen to the ego. And it's like, the ego does this and it does that. And that's not a correct assumption, because as she said, the ego is there to keep us safe. It's our thinking mind. We need that, because if we acted on pure impulse all the time, obviously that's not good either. So there needs to be a balance. So our ego does serve us in practical life, whereas our soul can guide us. And there's problems when we ignore either one of those. So let's start with the ego. So when the ego, okay, and I'm going to ask you this, Angela, because I'm going to let you take the lead on this part. So when the ego in our practical life, when it becomes problematic, how do you think that shows up for a person when the ego becomes problematic, when it's kind of in control and we're listening more to ego than soul? I mean, obviously there's ways that that's going to show up. So
Mhm.
how would that show up for someone?
Okay, everyone is different, but similarly or not, when our ego takes more over, it can be one of two different ways. It can be complete fear,
Mm-hmm.
because it's literally telling you of all these horrible things that may happen or did happen or have happened, or because that's the ego fear, not self-confidence in yourself part that's taking over. The other part to it is when it's all ego, it's, and I don't mean this in a bad way, so I'm going to say it and then explain it, because I know you don't want to. It's strictly left brain, strategical, action related thinking. But what happens? There gets to a point that you get burned out, and
Mm-hmm.
that's what I was gonna say.
Yeah.
Because, and we'll talk about it later, but that is why we need the balance,
Right.
because we need to know how to take the action and how and when to be strategical, but we also need to know kind of when to stop. And
Yeah.
when somebody is so much in the ego driven world, there's nothing wrong with having things. Let's say material things. There's absolutely nothing wrong with having material things. But it's the only focus, then there's something off, because then you're only looking at this particular item.
Right.
So so burnout, that is one. Feeling unmotivated.
Yeah.
Even though you're doing all these things, it's like it doesn't bring you happiness and satisfaction. It's like always that non happiness. I have to keep doing things off my checklist.
Right.
So for me, those are like clue things of when the ego is driving the situation more than the soul.
Yeah. I can say from personal experience, I have lived through times in my life where ego was in control, and I have absolutely experienced burnout. I mean,
Yeah.
mega burnout. So yeah, so I can speak from experience on that one. So and
Yeah. Yeah.
it's not a good thing. I mean, it's good in doses when it's a balance, because it
Yes.
does offer that critical thinking, that planning, that all of those things that the ego is supposed to help you provide. And like you said, there's nothing wrong with material things, but ego is more than the material. It's more than just seeking material stuff. It's just everything that goes along with it, the planning, the you got to do this, you got to do that, you got to, and it's like all of the stuff that particularly like society has taught us, this is what success means. So
Mm-hmm.
ego is like, okay, this is what we have to do to achieve that success. And like you said, it's like a checklist, and it's like you're checking off the things on the list. It's like, okay, you got to get the good job, check. Okay, you got to buy the house, check. Okay, you got to, and in the end, if it's not balanced, if that's not what your soul truly wants, and ego is just taking over, you're not going to feel fulfilled. And yeah, there's going to be a burnout there, and it's going to manifest in other kinds of ways too. So yeah, so I totally get that. So now let's talk a little bit about the soul, because again, we're talking about balance. What happens, because our soul is what guides us. Okay, so what
Mm-hmm.
happens though when we ignore the soul and we don't allow it to have its say? What happens there? How does that show up for someone?
Right. So we're unhappy. I'm trying to think of how to say this, because okay, let's talk about two different things. So the soul leads us to what we came to experience, to those desires, those dreams that we have, right?
Hmm.
And our soul plays its part in making sure that everything around us in our world, in our life, is going to play a part into that dream or that desire or
Yeah.
whatever it is that the soul is trying to tell you, the human, this is what you want, this is how you take it, this is the path. What happens when we don't listen to our soul? We don't see it. It's like a guide telling us, take exit 15 off the highway, and that is the shortest way and fastest way and
Yeah.
safest way for you to get there. And we're too busy in our heads. We're like, yeah, whatever. And we don't even see the guy, and we get off at like exit 999, and then we're like, why is my life not the way that I wanted it? Well, you missed
Yeah.
the exit like 900 exits ago. And that's what happens when
Yeah.
we don't follow the soul,
Yeah.
right? But then there's also, I don't know if you asked this or not, but there's also that when there's a cliche that I want to be able to say. There's too many spiritual people talking about you always have to live the dream of the soul and do everything the soul
Mm.
says. Okay, yes, but that's where we're talking about the balance.
Right. Right.
Because it's like you can't always be up in the clouds.
Right.
And I did tell somebody recently, you have awesome cloud visibility because you're up in the clouds and you're positive and things great. But you have to remember you came to live a human experience. That's where the
Right.
ego comes in. We need to find that balance. So there could be an overload of following the soul if we're just blissed out. And I know it's kind of weird for people to hear it. Amen.
That must have been something that somebody needed to hear, that needed to come out. So
Right.
there we go.
Right. The soul was like, yes, approved.
Exactly. Oh my gosh. See, this is what happens with the live show. You never know what's going to happen. So,
Exactly.
and we just roll with it and keep going.
Yes, we do. So yeah, so that's what it is basically.
All right. Yeah. So thank you for sharing that, because I was going to ask you too about what happens when the soul is like in control, and you already touched on it. It's like you kind of get into the loopy goopies, it's like, and sometimes you have to be grounded. You have to come back
Yes.
down to earth, okay? Because you
Yes.
can't always live in the clouds. So, so basically the takeaway from this though is that recognizing that the ego is not the enemy. It is a tool. And when it is integrated and balanced with the wisdom of the soul,
Right.
we can actually move with greater clarity and purpose. So, so you need both, okay? Not one or the other. And when one or the other is in control, you still feel out of balance. So it's about letting them both have their equal say, because that's what's going to keep you rooted and kind of going straight. You can kind of think of it like, and this just popped into my head. It's kind of like driving a car. And if you pull the wheel to the right, you're going to go over here. And if you pull the
Right.
wheel to the left, you're going to go in here. And what you really want to be doing is kind of going straight down the middle of the road, not over here and not over here, but straight down the middle. And so you have to have that balance between both in order to have that direction and clarity and purpose. So,
Yeah. Beautifully.
all right. So we talked about the ego and the soul. Now let's talk about one of the fun things about masculine and feminine energy. Again, we're talking about the equinox and balance. Okay. So we're talking about the balance of the ego and the soul. So now let's talk about the balance between masculine and feminine energies. Now, I know a lot of people get a little wonky with this whole masculine and feminine energy, and, some people may know it as more as yin and yang, and those kind of things. We all have both masculine and feminine energies, okay? And they are both needed. Just like ego and soul are needed, so are masculine, yang, and feminine energies, yin, are needed in our daily life. And so one way to look at how these, and I just had the thought about the yin and yang symbol and how they're balanced and everything. And so there's a reason to that. So a simple way to explain the difference between these energies and how they show up in your daily life is to think of them as complementary forces that guide how we take action and how we flow through life. For instance, masculine energy shows up as helping you plan your day, or organizing your tasks, or setting your goals, getting things done, making decisions, and things of that nature. Whereas the feminine is about trusting your gut feelings, being open to inspiration. It's creative. It helps you to engage in art and music, dance, and writing, but it also allows you to slow down and recharge and receive guidance. And so, like, in the naturopathic realm, we often describe the masculine sign as the doing side,
Mm-hmm.
and the feminine side as the receiving and the nurturing side. And so those are some ways that you can kind of look at it. So if you want to think about it in daily life and how they could complement each other, is you can think about, like, if you have a big project that you're working on, the masculine energy is going to help you create a plan, set the deadlines, and take action. Whereas the feminine energy is going to allow you to be creative and brainstorm the solutions, the new ideas, and to help you listen to your intuition when you're making choices. So that is the way that I would explain it. But I'm curious from a spirituality standpoint how you would explain the difference between the masculine and the feminine and how those two work together.
Okay. I don't think I would explain it very differently. I would say from a spiritual point, we all came to experience everything, right? So the masculine energy, again, like you mentioned, it has nothing to do with being masculine or feminine. There's just the names that they called it, or for whatever reason. The masculine energy in the spiritual field is more of, how do I say this? The Okay, let's start backwards. The feminine energy, it's the one. Okay, the feminine energy is the one that gives us the idea and the aha, the brain, the creativity, right? The expansion, the how do I nurture myself. So maybe the feminine energy gives us the idea of, maybe I should meditate more.
Right,
And then we use the spiritual energy for what? For the discipline it takes to take out 10, 15, 30 minutes a day, whatever
yeah,
we meditate, and actually go into a room, sit wherever you're going to sit, do whatever you're going to do, but actually take the action on what the feminine energy came the idea.
yeah,
And I think that's something in spirituality that many people are like, yes, it's the doing and it's the actions and it's a, yes, but we could also see it from the spiritual sense of our soul is telling us, hey, I think a time out in meditation would do us good. And then it's up to us, which is again the masculine side of things, to take action and say, okay, how do I implement that aha that
right,
just came to me, that was just channeled through me?
right,
Let's take it a step further, even esoteric, like even as I said that, I do a lot of channeling, as many of us do, and I channel things. Then it's up to, and that's from the feminine energy. I'm in a very nurturing space and it comes out and it's all nice, beautiful, angelic words. But then what do I do with it? That's up to my masculine energy side of my spirituality to say, okay, this is what I'm going to do with it. This is the post I'm going to create, or this is for people to know. So in spirituality, we should balance it both. Again, just like you're saying, with actions and with creativity, it's the same thing. It's just looking at it from a different way and using it for our spirituality itself is greatly, greatly beneficial. That I think sometimes it's overlooked.
yeah. So let's talk a little bit about what imbalance would look like. But if there was an imbalance between the masculine and the feminine,
Mm-hmm.
for instance, if the masculine is in control, it's like more like control and force and do.
Right.
Whereas with the feminine's in control, it's like lack of action. It's like it's all ideas but no action.
Right.
Does that kind of like
Yes.
resonate with what that might look like?
Yeah.
So yeah. So so would you like to add to that though, of what an imbalance might look like in someone's everyday life if that was happening with them?
Yeah, actually, I'm gonna read it because I actually, when I knew we were gonna talk about this, I looked it up because I found it for some other research that I
Yeah.
was doing, and it's super interesting because look, so overactive masculine, we all have masculine, we all have feminine, right? If we're
Right.
overactive and masculine, it's what we talked about: burnout, rigid control, disconnection from emotions. So that's something people can look for. If you're
Yeah.
disconnected from your emotions, you're in an overactive masculine frequency.
Right.
This is what's interesting though. An underactive masculine, so you're not in your masculine enough, is procrastination,
Hmm.
lack of direction, and feeling unmotivated once again.
Yeah.
So it's not just how do I balance, example, the masculine, it's, well, am I being too much or am I not being enough? Because it's not a matter of, oh, I need more masculine energy. Yeah, but which way?
Right.
So I find that super interesting. And then for the feminine, the overactive feminine is lack of structure,
Hmm.
emotional overwhelm, and passivity. Can't say that one. Passivity. And then the underactive feminine, we're not in our feminine enough, is that we are disconnected from our intuition and we're feeling uninspired. So it's interesting, what are you feeling or what recognizing in yourself, like the viewer? What are we doing? What are we recognizing? And which way do we have to go?
Right. All right. I like that. So some of you out there might be kind of saying, well, how do I know, what's in control? Okay. So I'm going to offer this little exercise, and then, Angelica, you feel free to, to jump in, if
Okay.
you want. So I'm going to offer this little exercise to help people to kind of see where they are, so they can make adjustments, if needed. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to have you close your eyes. You're going to close your eyes and reflect. Take a deep breath, close your eyes for a moment, and reflect on your natural tendencies in your daily life. Okay. So, reason why we have you close your eyes when we do stuff like this is because it sets the intention and it allows the soul to be able to talk to you. Okay. Once you set your intention. Okay. That's always very, very important. Then answer these questions. Do you prefer structure, planning, and setting goals? Do you feel the need to be productive and take action most of the time? Do you rely on logic and problem solving over intuition? Do you find it hard to slow down, rest, or receive help from others? If you answer yes to most of those, your masculine energy is more in control. Now, answer these questions. Do you flow through your day without strict schedules? Do you feel deeply intuitive and make decisions based on feelings? Do you enjoy creative, expressive activities without a set outcome? And do you prioritize rest, self care, and going with the flow? If you answer yes to most of those, your feminine energy is more in control. So if you resonate more with the masculine, obviously you would benefit more from softening and embracing intuition more and allowing yourself more space to receive. But if you resonate more with the feminine energy, you might need some more structure, direction, or action to bring your ideas into reality.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a good way to kind of see where you are. And it, in its simplest form, is if you find that you're more one way than the other, you can implement some of the stuff on the other side to bring in some of that balance. And so, which brings me to our next point. Angelica, if someone really wanted to go about trying to balance more between the feminine and the masculine, uh, how would you suggest that they do that?
Okay. Again, depending on everybody, right? What are their likes or dislikes? A few ideas. Dancing is more in the feminine energy.
Okay.
Strength training or working out is more in the masculine. Does it mean, again, gender? No, has nothing to do with gender. But the actual activity of raising weight is very different than the
Hmm.
activity of loosening up when you're dancing. So you can try to find something that, again, will flow with you, will resonate with you. That sounds, so that's one of the ones. So do you need more dancing in your life, or do you need to work out more in your life to like get that? So point aside. Um, Another one is journaling and like self inquiring.
Yeah.
When you journal, you're letting it flow, you're channeling, right? You're not, this is what I'm going to write about. But when you're
Right.
doing a self inquiry, you're strategically asking yourself and your subconscious questions. That's more strategic masculine. So when we start looking at things like that, how is this activity? Does it feel more organized and structured, or is it more free flowing? You can figure out what you kind of need for yourself and what you would enjoy doing. Does that help?
Yeah, definitely, definitely, definitely. So the takeaway from this particular, part of the conversation is recognizing that balance isn't about choosing one energy over the other. Just like we were talking about ego and soul, it's about knowing when to activate each for optimal flow.
Right.
Okay. Sometimes you need the masculine. You need to be able to plan. You need to be able to take action. Sometimes you need the feminine, where you can be creative, where you can have the ideas, where you can rest and self care and relax and avoid burnout. Okay. So it's about knowing where you are and what you can do to bring yourself back into balance when you find yourself shifting out of balance. Okay. And again, as we often talk about, the key to any of this is awareness. And so we're trying to help you to see how imbalance in these energies will show up in your everyday life, which can help you with your awareness so you can put actions into work, masculine, in order to balance everything out. So
Right.
all right, so let's talk now a little bit about realigning because we've talked about balance and everything. So now we're going to get to the nitty gritty when we're out of balance about, how do we realign? Okay, again, spring and the equinox is like a great time for doing this because we can utilize the energy of the earth that's already going into that shift and and bringing up the spring renewal, and it's like the perfect time to be able to set new intentions and to be able to change things and to recognize where you're off balance and put things into place to rebalance yourself. So let's talk a little bit about daily rituals or practices to help us stay balanced during seasonal changes. Okay, you've already mentioned some of the ones that I was going to mention, so I'm just going to mention some of the ones that I often talk about or suggest from my standpoint, and then I'll let you, expand, on either those or your own or
Okay.
whatever, because I know this is your wheelhouse. Again, I'm the more analytical person, so if you want to think about it that way, I'm the masculine, she's the feminine. Okay.
I mean, look at us. You're all nice and structured, and I'm like, la la la.
And together we balance it out. All right.
Yes.
So some of the things that I often recommend, first of all, is mindful movement because movement helps release stagnant energy and helps restore flow. The next is meditation. Again, we've talked about meditation already a little bit, and meditation is all about helping you find inner stillness and clarity. Okay, and sometimes we need that clarity in order to take the actions that we need to in the next phase of whatever we're doing. And then breath work. I love breath work. It's really good for restoring balance between doing and being. And
Mhm.
then, as Angelica has already pointed out, journaling. I'm a huge person of journaling and suggesting, big proponent of journaling because journaling is really good for releasing the old and setting
Mhm.
intentions for the new. I use journaling so much with my clients for different aspects, whether it's releasing old patterns, releasing old emotions, helping, release trauma. Journaling can be such a huge benefit. And I know a lot of people's like, I don't want to journal. I don't know what to journal about. You know what? You don't actually have to know anything to journal about. Although I have lots of tools where I'll I'll create prompts for my clients. I have lots of resources. If you guys are looking for resources, where I have like entire like sections of journal prompts that you can use for different types of things. Okay. Journaling doesn't necessarily have to be about writing. It can be doodling. It can, just writing your feelings down, whatever comes out. Okay, you can use it for intention setting as well. So don't discount journaling just because you think, oh, it's about writing and I don't know how to write or I don't want to write. You can use it in so many different ways. So what are some daily practices or rituals that you either use, or you tell you ask your clients to use to help them stay balanced, particularly during seasonal changes?
So there's a few daily, whether it's a seasonal change or not, just for us to keep ourselves aligned. For
Hmm.
example, gratitude. Just a simple practice of gratitude realigns us,
Yeah,
especially because when we have to bring our mind back into the what am I grateful for, instead of all the things I need to do, we bring our mind back. And once our mind calms down, our soul realigns because our soul knows what to do. So, gratitude, just a simple thing as gratitude.
yeah.
Another thing is, if you want to be a little bit analytical, little bit, grab a piece of paper, and just say, like, during this time of the seasonal change and everything, how is my life in this and this and this area? What would I like to, what we talked about at the beginning, what would I like to expand or change or
Yeah,
grow on? Because I think once we bring consciousness and our mind into something, we can use this time of the equinox and the spring and everything else to help give us that push for those things.
yeah,
So, just literally a daily practice could be, what would I like to change today? It doesn't have to be this really big, great, I want to change careers and I want to change houses. No, what can I change today? Maybe today I'll have one Coke less. Maybe
yeah.
today I'll have one more glass of water. It could be simple little things like that that not only indicate change but are change. That
Right.
as we're changing little by little, we are harmonizing, which is the key word. We're harmonizing ourselves into the alignment of who and what we really are without all the other distractions. Even based on that, during this season of spring, eat like, I try to do it as much as I can. Eat the vegetables of the season.
Yeah, yeah.
That is so, and it's something that we can do. And it's like, okay, maybe you get to change your menu for what you eat, try
Right.
something different. So those are little things that, yes, we can do daily. Yes, I understand sometimes going to the farmer's market and whatever isn't as convenient for some people. Drink a tea, a tea that you can buy at a supermarket. Just
Yeah,
if it's roots, did it come from a plant or something that had roots in it? Better than nothing. And then again, sit outside, do something outside, breathe in, and just say, I'm, accepting all the change. I am part of nature. It's all work that we can do on the daily if we get used to it.
yeah. No, I love that. So you actually started to kind of go into like the whole concept of holistic nutrition too, and it's about eating the seasons,
Yeah.
because because that's what is fresh and that's what's growing then, and that's what your body needs in that season.
Right.
And you can take that a step further too with locale as well, because you mentioned going to the farmers market. It's like, what's in your area? Your body is living in that area,
Yeah.
so the things that are growing in that general area is going to be very beneficial for your body. So yeah, so I love that, and that's a part of what I talk a lot about, that body, mind, and spirit connection, and how you cannot separate them. Today, we're talking about the spirit part of the body, mind, and spirit, but they're all interconnected. So thank you for sharing that, because that just kind of brought everything kind of back into this full circle that I am always talking about. Uh,
Totally.
so we have some things that we can do that can help us to realign when we're feeling out of balance. But sometimes when we know that we're out of balance and we know the tools that we can use to bring ourselves back into balance, sometimes there's this resistance because change. And that's when, the mind is trying to keep you safe, trying to keep
Mm-hmm.
you from change. That's what it does. And that's why balance is very important, because that way you don't get stuck in the same patterns and doing the same things. So change can often feel uncomfortable, um, and because it just is. So what advice would you have for someone who is struggling finding balance in their lives, whether it's ego and soul or masculine and feminine or whatever? Um, what advice would you have for them to help them to be able to work through that challenge, and work with it instead of against it, if you will?
Right. Um, Number one, take a deep breath and
Mhm.
know it's okay, because we resist change. We all do. We resist change. We start thinking, oh my God, and this, and we spiral which way, right? So
Yeah,
just pause and take a breath. And I think the most important advice that I can give is we all want change, because change is part of life. If we're not having change, we're stagnant. And anything that's stagnant is dead.
right.
Um, my recommendation is, if you can control it, try to take micro shifts, changes, like smaller changes along the path. We can't jump from point A to point C as
Right.
much as we want to get to point C. We don't know what's going to happen in B, C, D, E, and F. And that's the part that the ego freaks out about, because
Yeah,
the ego agrees, I want Z, but oh my God, did you see all the spikes in between? But if we start taking micro changes and we go from A to B, the mind's like, okay, this wasn't as scary. And then from B to C, by the time we get
right,
like to the middle of the alphabet, and I'm exaggerating it, but in a way I'm not, because how many things happen
right.
in life when we do go through a change? But our mind is like that. So be graceful with yourself, be graceful with your mind. Know that it's okay to be scared. We're all scared of something, we're all scared of change. It's just, little by little going for it. And then the most important thing is, because I know that there's things that are sometimes out of our control. So let's reframe it. How can you frame the situation instead of saying, this is all happening and I don't want it to happen? Start reframing it. Okay, why is this happening?
Yeah,
What is the best thing that can happen? What is the worst thing that can happen? And just start reframing it. Maybe this change isn't such a bad thing. Let's give it a try. Those are the three things that I can probably say, because we all go through it at
yeah,
some point or another, in varying degrees.
yeah, yeah. I mean, fear is probably the biggest thing that keeps us stuck. It's
Yeah.
the fear of the unknown. And I often encourage my clients, like you said, to do micro steps, if you will, because I call them baby steps, because it's like, it's like a step is a step, even if it's a baby step.
Yeah.
So, if this out there looks so daunting, start with a little teeny tiny step, a little teeny tiny movement, because small movements eventually equal big change. It's like, if you can't take one big step, take one little tiny step, and then another tiny step, and then another tiny step. And then before you know it, you're going to look back and you go, wow, look how
Yeah.
far I've come. So
Yeah.
yeah, so I love the idea of the micro step, or whatever it was that you called it. So my
The A
mind is
through
kind of,
Z with the spikes in between.
yeah, the spikes in between. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I use a lot the imagery of journey with my clients and with the talks that I do, because I think most people can relate to that. And as you said, it's like You want to get to point Z and you're at point A and you're looking at, wow, that seems like a long way. But if you can get from point A to point B and then point B to point C, it doesn't seem as daunting of a task when you break it up into smaller pieces.
Mm-hmm.
And see, that's going to be my masculine side that's jumping in and says, this is the plan.
I'm on board.
You know, the feminine side is saying, okay, we want to be over there. And the
Exactly.
masculine side is saying, okay, here's the plan to get to there.
Exactly. That is exactly it.
And so that's the balance that we're talking about. And this is not woo. Okay. I always like to throw that in because I have people that listen from all walks of life. And, you know, particularly because I have a lot of people that are tend to be more analytical, you know, much like the background that I came from, but I've learned to balance for the most part. And they initially will go, oh, that's so woo. And just, you know, it's like, but it's not woo. As I said before in another show I did with somebody else, it's not woo, it's you. So you just have to learn to talk to yourself and become aware and put the different things in place to be able to do that. So
Mhm.
all right. So we've talked, you know, a little bit about the equinox as a symbol for balance. We talked about, you know, the difference between ego and soul and how to balance that. We talked about the masculine and feminine energies and how they interplay with each other, how imbalance shows up in your daily life and things you can do to balance those out. We've talked about realigning ourselves during seasonal shifts. And again, you know, right now we have spring is upon us. It's a really great time to think about the changes that you want to make and put them in place and take advantage of the spring energy that's already naturally there. And
Mhm.
we've talked about embracing the change with awareness because change can be hard. Our minds are going to fight against it because um, the number one goal of our mind is to keep us safe, and that just is. And you have to learn to work with it
Mhm.
and not against it.
Mhm.
So, all that being said, what are your final thoughts? What would you like to leave the audience with today if they are, you know, contemplating their journey and trying to bring everything into to balance um, and utilizing some of the tools that we've talked about here? What would you like to say to them? What would you like to leave them with?
So let's try something different this time. Let's leave them with the fact of, do you want to go dancing or do you need to go work out? Because I think, and it's true, we can talk about this, we can explain it, but until we don't live it, until we don't experience what we're talking about, it's kind of like whatever. But for example, if you're somebody who loves to dance, go dance. If you're somebody who doesn't love to dance, go wiggle. You
Yeah,
know, it's kind of like, go give it a try, give it a shot. You don't need to lift God knows how much in pounds, for I'm not telling you to go become a bodybuilder if that's not what you want, but the actual physical movement. Why am I saying this? I'm saying it because your body's going to know what to do. Your
yeah,
body's going to be like, okay, fine, we went dancing, that's not what I want, but I like the feeling.
yeah,
Or, I didn't like that workout. Honestly, let's be real. If we haven't worked out, we're probably like, that hurt. I don't want to do that again. I'm a wimp. I can't carry that. But it's the fact of, God, I got up and I did something. It was action. So I encourage you as listeners to take action in either or and then feel for themselves. Where do they feel they felt better? And then do more things. Was it more towards the feminine stuff, the creativity, the expansion, the lightness? Or was it more towards the strategic, the structure, test it for yourselves. Don't believe us. Test it for yourselves and see what you need. That's what I would say.
awesome. I love that. I love that. So, finding balance is not about perfection. It's a lifelong journey of awareness, adjustment, and honoring both our human and our spiritual selves. Okay. We need balance in everything in order to live a purposeful yet successful and fulfilling life. You can't have one or the other. You need all of those. Okay. So I invite you to reflect on where you feel you're out of balance and what you can do to bring yourself back in balance. We'd love to hear from you. So if you have something that you'd like to share with us, please, put it in the comments. We'd love to hear what you have to say. We'd love to, to help you on your journey if we can. If you want to dive deeper, though, I have created a new free resource that's called Seasonal Balance Guide, aligning with the equinox. And I also did an additional special um, resource called the Equinox Guided Meditation. And I'll drop the links to those in the comments as well. And Angelica might have something fun for you too. So whatever fun things we come up with, we'll just drop them all in the comments and you can just grab them at your convenience. And if you enjoyed today's show, feel free to subscribe, like, and follow for more discussions on the mind, body, spirit connection. I am usually live with Angelica on the third Friday of each month. On the other Fridays, I have other people where we talk about the body, or we talk about the mind, or we talk about the soul, or any other topics. But Angelica is always here on the third Friday of the month where we talk about spirituality and what that means to you and to others, because it means something different to each person. And it's important for us to embrace all aspects of ourselves in order to have true wholeness. So I encourage you not to neglect your spiritual side and to think about what that means to you. It means something different to other people. It's not always, we've had this discussion before, it's not always about religion or anything like that. It's about what's deep inside of you, what it is that your soul wants. Okay. So, that is it for today's episode. Please come back and join us again. And thank you, Angelica, for being with us here again. She's on vacation right now, as you guys can see, and we're hearing all the nature sounds behind her. So thank you, nature, for putting your 2 cents in. We love that. So
Let's talk about spring and equinox. There's a whole bunch of chicks and roosters and ducks and geese. Yeah, I'm
yeah,
sorry.
yeah. I was hearing the rooster, crowing every, so often.
Yeah.
So it's like, all right, all right. I guess he was trying to make a point. So thank you. Thank you for that. Thank you,
He
nature.
was standing up for nature. He's like, we're here. You're one of us.
And that's just it. This is a time for rebirth and renewal, not only for the earth, but it can be for you as well. So I encourage you to take this opportunity during the equinox and figure out where you're off balance and what you can do to bring yourself into a more harmonious state, into more balance, so you can have clarity and be able to move with the flow with gusto. So until next time, remember, wellness isn't a destination, it's your daily journey. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
This episode is brought to you by Living Naturally for Life and angelicadelcarmen.com. Comment, like, subscribe.